The parts they played upon the stage were cast in a similar mold. Rough guys, tough guys, stooges and slobs, but always with a heart of gold. There was Silvers, Jacoby, Guilford, Barr, and Riley and Rose, gangster, a goon, or guy's best friend, who always wore the damnedest clothes. When the curtain went up, the crowd would roar, and the sound of those laughs remain. And I'm grateful that I came along at a time when I could be a link in that chain. Maids like me, I'm neat. I like maids, they're neat. Something no household should be without. Everybody ought to have a maid. Everybody ought to have a working girl. Everybody ought to have a lurking girl to putter around the house. Everybody ought to have a maid. Everybody ought to have a menial, consistently congenial and quieter than a mouse. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce myself. I am a character man. Now you may ask, well, what is that? Well, Webster's defines a character man as an actor, one that can play either a leading or a supporting part, but one that displays unusual characteristics or peculiarities. And that's me. I'm peculiar. Oh, wouldn't she be delicious, tidying up the dishes neat as a pin? Oh, wouldn't she be delightful, sweeping out, sleeping in? Everybody ought to have a maid, someone who you hire when you're short of help, to offer you the sort of help you never get from a spouse. Fluttering up the stairway, shuttering up the windows, cluttering up the bedroom, buttering up the master, puttering all around the house. This is David Burns. David Burns was one of the greatest character men in the history of Broadway. When I was growing up, he was my mentor. And after I was grown, he was my best friend. He was the original banjo and the man who came to dinner, Mayor Shin in The Music Man, Horace Vandergelder in Hello, Dolly, and as Senex, he and Zero Mostel introduced this song in A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. I was 15 years old when that show opened, and every Saturday afternoon, I would take the Double R train in from Bay Ridge to Manhattan for 15 cents. For 50 cents, I would buy a seat in the last row of the balcony of the Alvin Theater, 25 cents for an orange drink, and I would sit and watch Zero Mostel, David Burns, Jack Guilford, John Carradine, a whole cast full of character men work their magic, and all for under $1. Oh, think of her at the dustbin, especially when she's just been traipsing about. Oh, wouldn't she be delightful living in, giving out? Everybody ought to have a maid, daintily collecting bits of papers and strings, appealing in her apron strings, beguiling in her blouse. After the show came the best part. I would run down the 3 flights of stairs from the balcony onto 52nd Street, up the 3 flights of stairs to Davy Burns' dressing room. Sometimes I ran so fast I got there before he did. And I would sit and tuck myself in the corner and wait and watch. His dressing room was a watering hole for character men. In would come Frank McHugh and Hans Conried and Jack Albertson, and they would tell each other these wonderful stories. They were like the Jewish Knights of the Round Table. And there I was in the corner like Squire Schmuck, just wanting to be a part of all this. Well, the day I turned 16, Davy said, "Will you stop buying tickets? I'll get you a job working in the theater." What? He would get me a job working in the theater. 16 years old, and I'd be working on Broadway. like Patty Duke, you know? So my job had one line, and it was said at the back of the theater during intermission. Orange drink, $1. Orange drink, $1. Davy got me a job working for the Golub brothers. Now, the Golub brothers owned all the concessions in all the Broadway theaters. I was making $18 a week, but I got to go to work through the stage door. And the aroma backstage was so intoxicating. Well, the first day on the job, I had to go down and get my uniform, the proud uniform of a Golub, which was a navy blue blazer with purple and gold piping on the lapel, brass buttons, and right there over my heart, an embroidered emblem, the Alvin Theater. So I went down, the office was in the Paramount building, knocked on the door, and behind the door was Arthur Golub, president and CEO, who at this performance will be played by the great character man, Lou Jacoby.
What they had in common was persecution! Persecution!
I told you, we're all a little peculiar. So, Mr. Golub was sitting behind the desk, and I said, James Brochu reporting for duty for the Alvin Theater, sir. So proud to be a part of your organization. And without even looking up, he just went, oh, God. Oh, God, no, go ahead, please. And he pointed to the back of the door, and there it was, the Golden Fleece. Well, the only problem was I wore a 46 long. The only jacket he had left was a 38 short. I tortured myself in this jacket. Oh, God, please let me button the button, please. Finally, I got it buttoned. I looked like Quasimodo in a blue blazer. But I knew I didn't want to be in the back of the theater. I wanted to be up front. So I got all the kids in my neighborhood together, and I wrote, directed, and produced The Flagcourt Follies of 1959. I gave myself all the best numbers, including a truly unforgettable version of Bally High. And I closed the first act with a rousing rendition of Give My Regards to Broadway. And I was backed by 8 leggy 12-year-old girls. My father came back at intermission. He said, you were good. He said, you were very good. He'd never said that before. Now, don't get me wrong, I adored my father. He was a character man in his own right. He was very handsome, he was very charismatic, and I never knew my father drank until I saw him sober. Now, we came from a very middle-class family. His dad was a typesetter for the World Telegram and Son. During the Depression, they needed some money, so Dad got a job as a runner on Wall Street. And 40 years later, he retired as the vice president of the company, hating every minute of his job. How he met my mother? Right out of Kaufman and Hart. She was his secretary. Well, they dated for 3 years. The war came along. After the war, they married. About 2 years after that, I came along. And 2 years after I came along, she passed away. She had a bad heart. And she left my dad a widower. But after a few years, Dad became the merry widower. He loved to travel. That is Miami Airport in 1953. One building. Remember how we used to dress up to go on a plane? No more. Well, traveling with my dad was like traveling between a cross of Don Quixote and Auntie Mame if they were both loaded. He loved to travel, and he got up one morning and said, let's go for a ride. But I didn't realize he meant, let's go to Egypt and we'll ride a camel. I will never forget the camel driver's name. It was Moses Schwartz, I swear to God. Now, Dad had a ritual every Friday night at 7:15. He called it his night to howl. Friday night, 7:15, we'd take a car from Wall Street up to Midtown. I'd get off at the Alvin Theater. I'd sell my orange drink, and Dad would plant himself at Toots Shor's. Well, Davy and I would join him after. Davy and I would have dinner, and Dad had a 7-course meal, 7 double doors on the rocks. One night, we were sitting in Toots Shor's, And I look up, and here comes Jackie Gleason. Oh, he looked so dapper in a blue suit and a red carnation. And he came over to the table because he and Davy had worked together. He adored Davy Burns. So Davy introduced Gleason to my father, a meeting of two of the great alcoholic minds of all time. He introduced me to Gleason, and I turned right into Ralph Cramden. Davy Burns was born on Mott Street in Chinatown. He even spoke some Chinese. And he never really got the recognition he deserved until about 40 years into his career. They wanted to put his caricature up at Sardi's. Now, that's a big deal for an actor to be asked to be put on the wall of Sardi's. And he didn't really want to. He kind of liked being out of the limelight and being on the periphery. But I said, come on, they give you a party if you do it, and I wanted to go to the party. So we went to the installation of his caricature, and he signed it to Vincent. All you need is a big stomach and a sense of humor, Davy Burns. And they put that caricature on the wall of Sardi's of Davy. And there was an empty space next to it. I thought maybe someday I'd be up there with him. Well, as soon as he saw I was serious about being an actor, he introduced me to an agent who introduced me to a casting director, and all of a sudden, I had my first big commercial, national commercial. I was a dancing raisin for Post-Raisin Bran. Do you remember this commercial? We had big berets, and it said raisin across our shirt, and we're dancing in the bowl and the milk and schlepping and doing, and remember it? If you don't, here it is. I'm the raisin at 9 o'clock.
It's raisins that make Post-Raisin Bran so wonderful. It's raisins that make Post-Raisin Bran so different. It's raisins that make Post-Raisin Bran so raisiny. More raisins, lots more raisins, more raisins than you have ever seen before. If you like raisins, have juicy raisins. You like Post-Raisin Bran more.
Post, the more raisin bran.
21-year-old raisin. Isn't that funny? 2 weeks later, I was hired to be the lemon from outer space for Palmolive. And within weeks, I was known as one of the most dependable fruits in show business. Now, well, the guy who was the head raisin in that commercial was a fabulous character man named Barney Martin. Now, Barney had been a cop, became an actor, and you probably know him best if you ever watched Seinfeld. He was Jerry Seinfeld's father with the big glasses. He played Morty. Well, we took a liking to each other. He took me out to lunch, and he said, you know, you're very talented, but you're not going to work for 20 years. I said, what are you talking about? He said, you're a character man. Character men don't work till they're 40. I didn't want to hear that. I wasn't about to give up, but he was right. I was invisible. Hello, I have a monologue I'd prepared that you don't want to hear it. I have a song to sing. You don't want me to? Hello? Hello? Is anybody there? Hello? If someone stood up in a crowd and raised his voice up way out loud and waved his arms and shook his leg, you'd notice him. If someone in a picture show yelled, fire in the second row, this whole place is a powder keg, you'd notice him. And even without clucking like a hen, everyone gets noticed now and then. Unless, of course, that personage should be invisible, inconsequential, me. Cellophane, Mr. Cellophane, should have been my name, Mr. Cellophane, 'cause you can look right through me, walk right by me, and never know I'm there. I tell ya, Cellophane, Mr. Cellophane, should have been my name. Mr. Cellophane, 'cause you can look right through me, walk right by me. I never know I'm there. Suppose you was a little cat residing in a person's flat who fed you fish and scratched your ears. You'd notice him. Suppose you was a woman wed and sleeping in a double bed beside one man for 7 years. You'd notice him. A human being's made of more than air. With all this bulk, you're bound to see him there. Unless, of course, that human next to you is unimportant, undistinguished. You know who. Should have been my name, Mr. Cellophane, 'cause you can look right through me, walk right by me. I never know I'm there, I tell ya. Cellophane, Mr. Cellophane, should have been my name, Mr. Cellophane, 'cause you can look right through me, walk right by me. I never know I'm there, never even know I'm there. I hope I haven't taken up too much of your time. Half hour, please, half hour. Oh, I got a job. It's a big job, my first big off-Broadway show. Unfair to Goliath, an Israeli review. Oh, here's the reviews. Unfair to Goliath is unfair to audiences. Terrible, boring. But Jim Brochu'S is good, and he should play the lead in the Zero Mostel story sometime. Well, that's not going to happen, but Zero. Now, I got to know Zero when he was doing Forum, and I used to hang out at the theater. Well, one day I'm coming down Broadway, and here comes the great Zero Mostel. I said, Z, I'm an actor. He said, I'll be the judge of that. I said, you can be the judge of that, because I'm doing a play at the Cherry Lane Theater, and I want you to come see it. He said, I'd rather have hot kishkas put in my eyes. I said, well, you know, I'm very mad at you. Why? I said, years ago, you promised me an autographed picture of yourself, and you never gave it to me. And there at the corner of 50th Street and Broadway, Zero Mostel looked at me and said, you're not worthy, and walked away. 2 days later, I got to the theater, and there was a manila envelope with that picture in it. To Jimmy, with my admiration, Zero. So, despite the bad reviews, I hung up that picture of Zero, I redecorated my dressing room, and I prepared myself for a nice long run. Orange drink, $2. Orange drink, $2. Well, the Golub brothers sent me to a theater I had never heard of. It was Siberia. It was called the Harkness Theater. The play was called So Long 174th Street, based on Carl Reiner's book, Enter Laughing. I don't want to say the play was bad. It lasted 7 performances. But as the actors were leaving the theater after the last performance, they tore the building down around them. But every night, watching that show, I saw the story of my life on that stage. This is about a young man named David Kolowitz who so wanted to be an actor and be part of it all. But he lived in the 30s, and his fantasy was to be a great star, to have a mansion, to have a butler, and he wanted to bed every famous star in Hollywood. Pardon me, won't you? It's the telephone. Excuse me. Hello? Yes, this is the home of David Kolowitz, the most famous actor that ever lived. No, this is Marlowe, his butler. Who's calling, please? Oh, Miss Garbo. Oh, Miss Garbo. No, I'm sorry, Mr. Collowitz can't come to the phone right now. Pardon? What? Well, of course I can tell you, why not? He's screwing Dolores Del Rio. That's why he cannot speak to you. He's screwing Dolores Del Rio and may not be disturbed till he's through. No, he can't call you back at 5:30. At 5:30, he humps Alice Faye. Then Jean Harlow at 7, Mae West at 11, and somewhere between them, Fay Ray. No, tomorrow I fear is no better. He'll be banging Jean Arthur at 10. Carol Lombard at 1, Myrna Loy, Irene Dunn, half an hour for dinner, and then he's booked solid till midnight, at which time it's Dolores Del Rio again. Hold on, Miss Garbo, I'll check his book. Patience, dear, patience. Well, I could set you up an appointment, but the waiting list's endless, I fear. Ruby Keeler's been waiting 6 months now. Betty Davis for over a year. No, next Friday, that's out of the question. Cancellations are simply unknown. There's Miss Dietrich, and then it is time for Miss Bennett. No Constance. On Tuesdays, it's Joan. No, next Wednesday, you haven't a hope, miss. He stops Sylvia Sidney at 4. Then May Murray, May Clark, and after it's dark, with Lamour and Lamar, it's amore. Then, as usual, just as a nightcap, it's Dolores Del Rio encore. Hold on, Miss Garbo, don't get pushy. Well, I might have an opening next April. If you promise you won't take too long, you'll go right after Madeline Carroll. Oh, and just before Anna May Wong. Oh, wait, that isn't any good either. I'd forgotten these penciled-in dates. There's Joan Crawford, and then he must meet Sonia Henney. They're going to try it on skates. Please, there's no use you're weeping, Miss Garbo. No use you're taking that tone. You can rave, you can rant. Mr. Collowitz can't, simply can't come and talk on the phone. He's screwing Dolores Del Rio. And he wants to be, well, you know, alarm. The man who played the butler in that show was a wonderful character man named George S. Irving. 32 Broadway shows, starting with Oklahoma. And watching George Irving every night was a lesson, a master class in comedy. And so I studied the man. And then Davy said, you know, you got to meet my friends. And he'd take me to these parties, but his friends were Garson Kanin and Maureen Stapleton. I was in heaven. But the friend of Davy's I got to know better than any of them was a lovely man named Jack Guilford. Remember Jack Guilford? He had a great face. Well, when he was doing Forum, he would come off stage black and blue because Zero would just pound him, and for the laughs. His next show, he triumphed, and it was a show called Cabaret, where he played opposite Lottie Lenya. Well, he had a song in the middle of the first act, and I often wondered if he wasn't thinking about Zero when he sang the song. You see, the only word you need to understand in this little song of mine is the Yiddish word, miskait. Miskait means ugly. Miskait means funny looking. Miskait means a miskite. Once upon a time, there was a miskite looking in the mirror. He would say, what an awful shock. I got a face that would stop a clock. Meeskite, such a pity on him. He's a meeskite, God up in his heaven put him out on a shaky limb. He put a meeskite on him, but he grew up, because even meeskites grow up, and he went to the cheder, this is the Hebrew school. He sat beside this little girl, and when he asked her name, she replied, I'm pale. He ran to the Zeta, this is the grandfather, said in that screechy voice of his, you told me I was the homeliest. Gramps, you're wrong. Pearl is. Hey! A meeskite, no one ever saw a bigger meeskite, everywhere a floor, and maybe that is the reason why I'm going to love her until I die. Meeskite, oh, it's such a pleasure. She's a meeskite, she's the one I'll treasure, for I thought there could never be a bigger meeskite than me. Here's what happened, and so they were married, and in a year she turned and smiled. I'm afraid I am going to have a child. Oy. 9 months she carried, worrying how this child would look, and all the cousins were worried too, but what a turn fate took. Oy. Whew. Ah. Gorgeous, they produced a baby that was gorgeous, gathering round the cradle all the relatives, odd and oohed. He ought to pose for a baby food. Gorgeous. Would I tell a lie? He's simply gorgeous. Who would have believed that we would see such a flawless gem out of two meeskites like them? But there's a moral. All my stories have a moral. Moral. Yes, indeed, this story has a moral. Moral, though you're not a beauty, it is nevertheless quite true. There may be beautiful things in you. Meeskite, listen to the fable of the meeskite. Anyone responsible for loveliness, large or small, is not a meeskite at all. Gorgeous. Now, when Jack was doing cabaret at the Broadhurst, Davy was across the street at the St. James doing Hello, Dolly. And around the corner, the great Zero Mostel and Maria Karnilova in Fiddler on the Roof. There's a great backstory to the creation of Fiddler. Jerome Robbins, the crazy choreographer-director, and Zero Mostel, the so easy to get along with star, hated each other. But everybody hated Jerry Robbins. He was not a nice man. Davey did a show with him called $1 Billion Baby. He said Robbins was giving notes on the stage. And as he was talking to the actors, he was backing up towards the orchestra pit. And nobody said a word. They let the man fall in. Now, Zero hated Robbins because he had testified in front of the House on American Activities Committee, named Jack Guilford and Jack's wife, Madeline. So the rehearsals for Fiddler were very, very tense. They hardly spoke. One day, Robbins was directing the monologues. And he said, Zero, I want you to direct them directly to the audience. Zero said, no. This is an order. It's a direction. I don't care. I'm not going to do it. He said, do you have any other ideas? He said, yes. I want to be talking to my best friend. And Robbins said, well, I'm not putting another actor on the stage with you. So, if you're all by yourself out there, who's your best friend? And Zero very calmly walked down stage center and said, Dear God, you made many, many poor people. I realize, of course, it's no shame to be poor. It's no great honor either. So what would have been so terrible if I had a small fortune? If I were a rich man. All day long, I'd biddy bum. If I were a wealthy man, I wouldn't have to work hard. If I were a biddy rich, idle man, I'd build a big tall house with rooms by the dozen right in the middle of the town. A fine tin roof with real wooden floors below. There could be one long staircase just going up and one even longer coming down and one more leading nowhere, just for show. I'd fill my yard with chicks and turkeys and geese and ducks for the town to see and hear, squawking just as noisily as they can. And each loud will land like a trumpet on the ear, as if to say, here lives a wealthy man. The most important men in town would come to fawn on me. They would ask me to advise them, like a Solomon the Wise. If you please, Rep-Tevi, pardon me, Rep-Tevi, posing problems that would cross a rabbi's eyes. And it won't make one bit of difference if I answer right or wrong. When you're rich, they think you really know. If I were rich, I'd have the time that I lack to sit in the synagogue and pray. And maybe I'd have a seat by the eastern wall. And I'd discuss the holy books with the learned men 7 hours every day. And that would be the sweetest thing of all. If I were a rich man, bum. All day long I'd biddy bum. If I were a wealthy man, I wouldn't have to work hard. Bum. Lord, who made the lion and the lamb, you decreed I should be what I am, but would it spoil some vast eternal plan if I were a wealthy man? I saw the second performance of Fiddler on the Roof. I was going to college in Pittsburgh, and my best friend Stevie and we flew in just to see that second performance. I sat in A105. I'll never forget what I saw in front of me that night. Well, the two of us left, and we went up to Times Square just to reflect on what we had seen and talk about our future. He was studying piano composition, and he wanted to have 3 shows running on Broadway at the same time. He said, "What's your dream?" I said, "It's too silly." He said, "What?" I said, "I just would love to have my picture up at Sardi's one day. I don't care if it's in the men's room." Well, Davy had another job. And if Davy had a job, so did I. Orange drink, $4. Orange drink, $4. You know, character men don't get to sing the big song in their show. They always sing silly little things. But in this show, Davy got to sing the big song. Didn't have the same lyrics, but we're sure still singing it today. You went away from the lights of 14th Street and into your personal haze. Now that you're back in the lights of 14th Street, tomorrow will be brighter than the good old days. Hello, Dolly. Well, hello, Dolly. It's so nice to have you here where you belong. I never knew, Dolly, without you, Dolly, life was awfully flat, and more than that was awfully wrong. You know, sitting in Davy's dressing room at the Alvin Theater was special with all the people who came back. Sitting in his dressing room during Hello, Dolly at the St. James was surreal because it was a huge hit and everybody wanted to see it. One night, God's truth, I am sitting in Davy's dressing room and I watched Noel Coward eat Kentucky Fried Chicken with Colonel Sanders, the real guy with the white suit and the he and the ha. There was a guy in the next dressing room to Davy, and his name was Charles Nelson Riley. Now, you remember Charlie Riley from the game shows. What you don't know is he was a brilliant acting teacher and a brilliant director. I took a class with him. There was one girl in the class who constantly annoyed him, and he was very patient, but she was preparing to play Juliet this one time, and so she interrupted the class. Mr. Riley? Yes, dear? She said, do you believe Romeo and Juliet had carnal relations? He said, well, in the Chicago company they did. Now, about this time, my dad was not doing very well, so I moved back to Brooklyn to be my parents' parent. You know, he and Mr. Burns were good friends, but there was a little jealousy between them because Dad wanted me to go on Wall Street. But I followed his friend, Mr. Burns, instead because I knew if I did not have a life in the theater, I didn't want to have a life at all. A couple of days before he left us, I was sitting by his bed. He said, would you sing me a song? He'd never asked that before. I thought he was going to ask for one of his trickly Irish numbers, Danny Boy or The Rose of Tralee, or instead he asked for this. Did you ever see two Yankees part upon a foreign shore, when the good ship's just about to sail for old New York once more? With tear-dimmed eye, they say goodbye. They're friends without a doubt. Then the man on the pier shouts, let 'em clear, as the ship strikes out. Give my regards to Broadway. Remember me to Herald Square. Tell all the gang at 42nd Street that I will soon be there. Whisper of how I'm yearning to mingle with my old-time throng, yes. Give my regards to old Broadway. He died at 7:15 on a Friday night, the beginning of his night to howl. Orange drink, $5. Well, my last great job for the Gollop Brothers. This time I had seniority, so I could pick the theater I wanted to be at, and I picked the Schubert because of the show, the roar of the grease paint, the smell of the crowd, and the two actors, Anthony Newley and Cyril Richard. Well, one Wednesday afternoon, I'm cleaning up my little orange drink thing. I go out the front door of the Schubert Theater into Schubert Alley. The stage door opens, and out comes Cyril Richard. And I knew I had to talk to him. I said, "Excuse me, Mr. Richard, my name is Jim, and I run the Orange Juice Student of the Bend. You know, I can leave at intermission, but I don't because of that song. You sing in Act Two, it's the most beautiful song, and you do such a gorgeous job of it. And then I saw you in Pulver's, and I saw you in Peter Pan." Well, the more I talked, the wider his eyes got, like, who is this crazy person? Finally, I just ran out of breath. He looked either way and said, "Could you go get me a corned beef sandwich?" I said, "Well, of course, I'd be delighted. Gaiety Delicatessen, corned beef on rye, coleslaw, 2 pickles." I went, I got the sandwich, I brought it back to his dressing room. He started to put his hand in his pocket like he was going to give me a tip, and I said, "Oh, God, no, please. I'm happy to do it." I said, "But if you need some company while you have your sandwich, I'd certainly be willing to sit and keep you company." He said, "Sir Jimmy the Juice Boy, be seated." Well, this turned into a Wednesday afternoon ritual. I would go get him his sandwich, and after a couple of weeks, I'd get 2 sandwiches and sit, and we would talk. I'll never forget the greatest story he ever told me. He said, "Did I ever tell you about having dinner with Rex Harrison and Moss Hart after My Fair Lady?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, one night Rex and Moss and I were at Sardi's, and a woman of a certain age came over to the table, and she said, 'Oh, Mr. Harrison, oh, I waited a year for my Fair Lady tickets. I saw it this afternoon. You're my most favorite actor. If you could sign my playbill, you would make me the happiest woman that ever lived.' And Rex Harrison said, 'You old biddy, I don't care about how long you waited or what your favorite anything is. I'm trying to have my dinner, and I'd like you to get the hell away from my table.' And the woman took her program and she smacked him in the head with it. And Moss Hart said, 'Well, that's the first time I ever saw the fan hit the shit.'" He deserved that. Well, you know, it's funny how things come full circle. And just a few years ago, they did the first New York City revival of The Roar of the Grease Paint, and I got to play Mr. Richard's part. And I got to sing that song. And by the way, it was always Mr. Richard. Who can I turn to when nobody needs me? My heart wants to know, so I must go where destiny leads me, with no star to guide me and no one beside me. I'll go on my way, and after the day, the darkness will hide me, and maybe tomorrow I'll find what I'm after. I'll throw off my sorrow, beg, steal or borrow my share of laughter. With you I could learn to, with you on a new day. But who can I turn to if you turn away? After Hello, Dolly, Davy did 3 more Broadway shows. Lovely Ladies, Kind Gentlemen, and Sheep on the Runway, 2 enormous flops. But then he came back as Gregory Solomon, the old furniture dealer in Arthur Miller's play, The Price. Well, he was 68, and he wanted to retire. But he got talked into doing just 1 more Broadway musical. It was called 70 Girls 70 by John Kander and Fred Ebb, and it was trying out in Philadelphia. So I would drive him down for the rehearsals, I'd stay for the previews, and then drive him back up to Bucks County, where he had a farm. The night of March 12th, 1971, he had just finished singing the best song in the show, and he had just gotten the biggest laugh when he had a heart attack and he collapsed and he died on the stage of the Forest Theater. The audience thought it was part of the show, and they roared. And the last two sounds David Burns ever heard were laughs and applause for a character man. With no star to guide me, and no one beside me, I'll go on my way, and after the day, the darkness will hide me. Well, I wanted the darkness to hide me at his memorial service. It was at the 46th Street Theater. I sat next to the last row of the orchestra. And just after it began, I felt somebody come in late, sit behind me. The service was perfect. A who's who of the American theater spoke. Stephen Sondheim, Arthur Miller, Jerry Herman. And it was just like he was, funny and irreverent. And then it was all over, and I turned around. The house lights came on, and I saw who had come in late. It was Jackie Gleason, and the tears were just running down his cheek. And maybe tomorrow I'll find what I'm after. I'll throw off my sorrow, beg, steal or borrow my share of laughter. With you I could learn to, with you on a new day. Do you know there is not a day goes by that I do not think about Davy Burns and that other wonderful cast of characters who were so kind to me when I was growing up? Oh, and remember I told you about my friend Stevie, who wanted to have 3 shows running on Broadway at the same time? Well, he wrote this last song, and his dreams did come true. His name is Stephen Schwartz, and he wrote Wicked and Godspell and Pippin. Well, a couple years ago, I got that call. I couldn't believe my ears. And they said, "We're putting your caricature up." And I walked in, and sure enough, there I was, right next to Davy Burns. Well, a couple of weeks ago, I went to see a show at the Alvin Theater. Oh, it's the Neil Simon Theater now, but no, it'll always be the Alvin Theater to me. And I walked into the back, and there was the orange drink stand. I mean, that was a full bar. Brass and glass, but there was another young man standing there, and I saw myself, a kid with hopes and dreams. So I went up to him to buy an orange drink, and I couldn't afford it. I've heard it said that people will come into our lives for a reason, bringing something we must learn, and we are led to those who help us most to grow if we let them, and we help them in return. I don't know if I believe that's true, but I know I'm who I am today because I knew you. Like a comet pulled from orbit as it passes the sun, like a seed dropped by a skybird in a distant wood. Who can say if I've been changed for the better, but because I knew you, I have been changed for good. It well may be we will never meet again in this lifetime. So let me say before we part, so much of me is what I've learned from you, you'll be with me like a handprint on my heart. And now whatever way our stories end, I know you have rewritten mine by being my friend. Like a ship blown from a mooring by a wind off the sea, like a stream that meets a boulder halfway through the wood. Who can say if I've been changed for the better, but because I knew you, because I knew you, because I knew you, I have been changed. For good.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to present to all of you Helen Hayes Award winner, playwright, actor, he does it all, the character man. How about it for Jim Brochu?
I'll never forget today. Stephanie Alejandro.
A big thank you to John Randall at the piano.
Thank you so much.
A big thank you to our technical team, Stephanie, Edgar, Alejandro. Jim, come on back out one more time. How about? Thank you so much. Character man Jim Brochu. Backstage, we have Chris. We thank all of you for being here. Hey, John, thank you very much at the piano. Have a wonderful evening, everybody. We'll see you at showtime, 8:30, 10:30 showtime right here. Thank you for joining us for Character Man.